Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of TruthWorks. I'm your host, Jessica Neal. I'm here with my co-host, Peter Clarke. Hey, Pete, what's up?
Hey, how are you?
You have a different background today. You're brick.
I try to do every episode differently, go to a new place. So I don't actually know whose house I'm in at the moment. So hopefully I don't come home while I'm here, but we'll
Yeah,
see.
no, good. Good
Yeah,
to know. Well, if you get arrested, we'll know why.
you'll know what happened. If I suddenly
We'll
have to
know what
run,
happened. Okay. Importantly than Pete getting arrested. I'll bail you out, by the way, if you do.
thank you.
We have a very exciting guest. We have been trying to get this person on the show for a long time, and our schedules finally aligned, and we got her here. So I want to welcome to the show the Chief People Officer of Canva. Her name is Jennie Rogerson, and she's had a fascinating journey, and she's working inside one of the world's, I don't know, I would say most well-known and most interesting companies. I use it regularly myself. I know many of the listeners use it as well. Canva is amazing, but I'm so excited to have you on the show. Jennie, welcome. And I've read a lot about your story, but I kind of want to talk about how you got to where you are, because you have a just interesting background. And, I think you worked your way into this somehow. And here you are leading people at one of the world's most, well-known iconic companies. So congrats to you and welcome to the show, and tell us how that all happened.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. So yes, my journey is not a typical one, I would say. So I come from a background of hospitality, have always loved the hospitality industry, have loved making really gorgeous human experiences and also making things feel really efficient. I think my blend of kind of what drives me is really solid operations and then a really human experience, and those two things coming together. And so it kind of felt fated that I ended up in a people role, but it's been a kind of journey to get here. So I started off in hospitality. I then moved into hospitality tech. And then a colleague at the hospitality tech company that I was working at said, I really want to learn more about Canva. I want to learn how to make presentations. We should go to this event. They're hosting something at their office. Will you come with me? I begrudgingly went to this thing after work of like how to make great presentations. And it was one of the best evenings ever because I just learned about this company that I'd used the product for a long time, but I didn't realize they were based in Sydney for one. And that's where I was living. And then I also just didn't think about the fact that you could work for this company. So I turn up. We do this workshop. The people that were running the workshop were incredible humans. They had these great stories of things that they had been working on. And then I went to the bathroom and there were these gorgeous signs on the way that were just really human of like why they have what they're called communal tables of lunchtime and everyone eats together and how they support people through really hard times and those kind of things. And I just thought, wow, this company really cares about people. This is phenomenal. And so I went on a journey to get a job there because I was just like, this is such an inspiring place to work. Like what a fantastic human place and what a great product. And those two things combined was fantastic. So I applied for a few jobs, didn't get a few jobs, and I spoke to the same colleague who took me to the event, and she said, oh, don't worry about it. Just go somewhere else. Go to some different place. Think about something different. And I had something in my instinct that was like, no, it's this place. There's something about this company. There's something about this product. I think it's so helpful. It helps people achieve their jobs. Like, look how much we get done with this product.
Yeah.
And then look how much they care about people. This is fantastic. Like, what a combo deal. And often you get one or the other. So I doubled down and I saw a job advertised for the co-founder's exec assistant role. And bear in mind, I was in operations at the time. So it was kind of a career pivot, I would say, but I just saw it as this opportunity to learn an incredible amount about the company and to learn from two people that I deeply respected who had built this incredible business. And so I remember going to apply for the role and there were thousands of people that had applied for it. And I thought, I've got no experience in this domain. There's nothing on paper that's going to say that I should get this job. And so I created a website instead of, hey, this is who I am. This is the kind of things that I like to work on. This is what I know about your company from coming to these events, but also all my research online. Here's where I think I can help. And I then was going to send it to Mel, who is the CEO. But when I was looking on LinkedIn, Cliff had a thing in his bio that said, you're great, we're hiring. And I just thought, perfect. And so I sent the website through to him and it went from there.
Wow. I mean, what a story. And I don't know if people are listening, but I think, Pete, you're probably picking up on the same thing I'm picking up on. One, you didn't take that terrible advice and you didn't give up. And then two, you spoke to the company's heart and made like a presentation using the product, I'm guessing. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty cool. And then, so I guess the founder liked that. And
Yeah.
Well, that's how you stand out. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's great.
I actually didn't use the Canva product to begin with.
Oh, you
Canva hadn't
didn't?
launched. Well, I had tried, but Canva hadn't launched Canva websites at that point. And so I built it on a different product. And then the night before I sent it, Canva launched Canva website. So I had to rebuild the entire thing and transplant it onto the Canva product, which was actually a really helpful experience because during my interview process, they asked a lot about kind of what my experience was with the product. And like many people who launch very early products, there was a lot that could have been improved. And so I had to be honest and say, like, loved the final outcome, but these were the journey to get there. And so it was a really interesting interview process too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Nice.
So
Came
you
with
started
product
out.
feedback.
Yeah, right.
Everyone loves
Yeah, they did. Well, they
especially the
should.
product people.
They should.
Exactly right.
So you start out as the assistant. They hire you, and then
Yes.
then how do you become the chief people officer? How does that happen?
Yeah. So it all kind of started in my interview process, which was really fantastic. So the interview process was we had an early quick chat with the recruiter, which was really fantastic. I then got given a challenge. It was a 2-part challenge where I was given it, I got to take it away. I got the week to work on it. And then I was asked to come back and present it to Cliff and one of the hiring managers at the time. And the challenge was 2 parts. The first one was Mel and Cliff, the CEO and the COO, are going to San Francisco in 3 weeks, write them an itinerary of what they should be focused on. And the second part was we want to host a workshop based around Canva's product onboarding. Tell us how we might best do that. And so both of those tasks I was really excited about, and I just kind of went way over the top on them. So the San Francisco itinerary, I'd done a lot of research on who our investors were, what that looked like, who they might want to meet, but I'd also gone really deep into, what would make an amazing trip, like what were the goals of the trip, but also on the personal level, I knew that Mel and Cliff had an anxious dog from the first interview that I'd had with Cliff, and so I'd added things in like find a reliable pet sitter who's got experience with an anxious dog, and then gone right up to like we should be meeting with Mary Meeker because she had recently come on as like all these kind of things. So everything from high level to tiny detailed and like nothing left spared, and then condensed into this quite brief, like here's what I would focus on and here's how I would focus on, so that you just didn't have to worry about that. And then on the onboarding, I had been a teacher. I'd been an English language teacher, so English as a second language teacher. And so creating kind of interesting, fun workshops was really in my wheelhouse. It was really fantastic. Like, how do you keep people engaged for 60 minutes, 90 minutes? And so I'd created these kind of choose your own adventure of, do you want a 30-minute, 60-minute, 90-minute workshop? And then all of these different ways that you could bring out the best in people to get the best outcome of a session like that, and presented it back. And then during this interview process, when I was presenting it, I got kind of about 75% of the way through. And it was this real back and forward with Cliff and I on like live questions, like pushing back on things, like real partnership of like, I don't think this would work because of this reason. And me saying, okay, well, great. Like, let's pivot and do something else. Let's do something different. And just learning how to work together kind of in that process. But also really, we both came to the table knowing that I didn't have any experience in this domain. And so it was less about, you get into an interview and they say, tell me about a time that you've done X, Y, Z. There just was none of that. It was like, tell me how you'd work this out. Like, how would you figure this out? And, oh, well, we've got some like very differing opinions. Like people get very territorial about these things. Like, how would you navigate that in the moment? Like those kind of questions of like figuring things out. And so by the time I got into the role, Cliff said to me, we're actually going to pivot away from the exec assistant role that you applied for, and we're going to turn in something different. It's going to be called something different. And we workshopped the name Leadership Operations, which became a kind of chief of staff role, which sat between the founders and the leadership team on like, how does that team work together best? How do we make sure that that is operating as best as it can? And it went from there.
Well, yeah, it's clear that he saw something special in you that, and they're like, no, this could be more like this person. And it's interesting because I think that likely all of your years in hospitality, I mean, you've got to solve problems really quick.
Yeah. And you've got to make the experience great, right? Like it's a live thing. Like,
yeah. And if you don't, that, it comes back to you. Right.
Yeah, it's a Yelp review really quickly.
Right. What is it that you think about that hospitality experience maybe, set you up to be in this role? Like what, now that you've sort of had time to think about it and now you're in this really big role, what was it about all of that experience that helped you?
I think it really does sit between those two things, like the great operations that underpins any kind of great experience and then the human experience of it. And so if you think about a hospitality experience of running a high-end, quite large restaurant, say there's 220 covers a night, that's 220 experiences you've got to manage. That's just the people sitting at the tables. You've also got the bar staff, you've got the kitchen staff, you've got the host staff, you've got the suppliers, you've got the waste management, you've got all of this thing, and it kind of needs to be like an orchestra that really comes together in a really meaningful way to make something beautiful and to make these experiences. And I remember very early in my hospitality days, I think I was just exhausted after a shift, and there was a moment where I just was like, this is exhausting, and these people were so demanding, or this table were really hard to connect with, or like these things. And then I just thought, I wonder how often these people are going out for dinner. Right? You just don't know the stories behind these tables. Is this a table that, have really saved for this experience and they've really put all their effort into making this really a great experience for their anniversary or whatever it is? Or is this a dinner where someone is pitching their company that they've worked really hard to create and have spent years on this, and this is a really important dinner, and the effort that needs to go in behind the scenes to make the experience great so that they don't have to think about it. They can just focus on that experience is something that I deeply love. And I think that really happens a lot in companies. Like, how does your company operate to make sure that all of the friction is as much as possible taken out so that things can be as friction free as possible so people can do the greatest work or have the greatest experiences rather than focusing on, what is happening with our drinks? What is happening with why is the food taking so long between entree and main course? All those things should be taken care of. And I think there is that kind of experience that matters so deeply in many different industries, but especially in hospitality that people feel quite strongly about.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. And I'm going to let Pete talk in a second, but I'm hogging all the time. But that is very much how I approached my work. And people is, I don't know, I never really aligned with being the human resources officer. Like that's, who cares? But it was about efficiency and friction. And there's so much that gets into the system that just slows everybody down. And then if you're slowing everybody down, nobody's getting anything done. We're not meeting our goals. We're not winning as a business. And I don't think a lot of people that do what we do think about it in those terms. And so it's interesting that, because if you grew up in HR, maybe you think about it as more programs or de-risking or, making things compliant. And that also ends up slowing everything down when you're approaching it that way, because I think a lot of times you're looking at the minority of like the thing that could happen versus like amplifying the majority. Yeah. And it's like you're trying to amplify the majority, not protect for the one thing that probably won't happen. I
think that's so true. And it's something that I see in a lot of HR teams when I talk to a lot of other people in the industry is HR seems to either take everything onto their own shoulders of we need to fix everything, or they put everything onto the businesses. They're the reason things aren't going well. And I think that neither is true. I think there is a real accountability for every single person in the organization to be accountable for the culture. It's not a people thing. Like how things work, how things operate is everyone's responsibility. And it's something we try to infuse a lot at Canva is you don't join Canva to experience the culture. You join Canva to be the culture. And I think that doesn't just mean culture to me isn't the fun, frivolous, quirky things on top. The culture is how people feel about how they get work done. And does that feel friction free? Does that feel like an enjoyable experience? Do they have a team around them that they're really inspired by? Does work feel easy? Does being a great person on a great winning team at a great winning company feel like an experience that they are having? And how do they feel accountable for that? And every single individual in the business should feel like that. It's something that we infused from the very early days. So we have had and kept our Fix-It form for, I think, going on 8 years now. So it was a form that we created as like anyone can submit to it. It's anonymous. So there's 2 questions. What is the fix that you see that needs fixing, and what is your solution to fix it? And then all of those come to me and I triage them out to the right teams with the people team. But it's something that people should feel ownership of. So in your teams, you should feel ownership of that culture and the ability to change that in order for you to get your work done. But also at a company-wide level, if things are out of your remit, but you see them as broken, please don't be silent about them or wait for the employee survey or all those things. Like this is a live, always on heartbeat that people feel like they can and should be solving.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I like that you make them give a solution because a lot of people
But
like
it's so
to complain,
important, right?
but they
It's
don't
so
like
important
to
because
give the
often, like,
solution.
Can't
I
just
also
be
don't think
part of
it's
the problem.
Right.
I also don't think it's necessarily just that. It's often like people will have a solution in their head, but unless they're specifically asked for it, they don't feel
They
like
don't
they
give
should
it.
because they don't want to step on people's toes or they don't feel like it's their place. And so I think just
Yeah.
explicitly asking, like, what would you do? Because good ideas come from anywhere.
Yeah, no, I know. Tons of people would come to me and they're like, there's a problem with this. I'm like, okay, well, what's the solution? Like, I don't have one. I'm like, well, then I can't help you. Like, unless you're willing to fix it, like, we shouldn't talk about it. But
Yeah, but I love what you brought just in terms of the hospitality experience too, of, kind of looking at every situation and person too, and sort of what's the context behind that, which we tend to not do in business often, is sort of just like try to generalize it as much as possible, right? Sort of have big buckets of things that people try to fit into, where a lot of the friction actually just comes from some unique aspect of something, some particular situation, and getting behind that, and then unlocking that is a smart way to approach it. So,
yeah,
and who knew all that hospitality experience would just lend itself well to the job you ended up getting created for you.
yeah,
I love that point, Pete. I think it's a really important thing to remember that there's a human being behind every process, both on the people that created the process, but all the people who are experiencing it. And so something that we have really tried to do is make sure that our experiences cater for as many as we can, but also really take into consideration the nuance that people might be going through, right? There's that age-old kind of passage that says, you don't know what anyone's going through until you walk a mile in their shoes, but also like they shouldn't have to tell you for that to be factored in. And so at any given time, people might be coming back from parental leave, but really struggling on many things. If they are an expat and don't have the community support, or if they have been going through postnatal depression or any of those things, like that should be factored into how you build programs for your organization so that those things can be true and the team supporting that one individual can be ready for that and aware of what those signs might be, and making sure that you're building for those kind of moments so that if anyone experience kind of appears at your company, your team are ready to catch it or learn from that experience and share with others on how they went through it too.
Well, I'm glad that you're bringing that up. And we actually didn't get to the part where they promoted you to chief people officer. Do you want
can go back.
Do you want to tell that real quick?
Yes, for sure. So I stayed in the leadership operations role for about 18 months, which was such a formative time. So it was an amazing time because I joined December 2019, early 2020, which, sits in most people's memory for many reasons, but there's one big one. And so it was a real steep learning curve of how we went through that. But also Canva as a company grew more in that time than ever before. So it was a real hockey stick growth moment for us. And during that time, I worked with Mel and Cliff on lots of different programs, but also lots of the leadership team on things like our COVID response, but also our diversity programs. We didn't have a lead for customer support for a while, so I chipped in there and worked on that and then recruited the amazing person who now leads that, Mark. And so all these different kind of programs and projects were such formative years for me at Canva, of both like being thrown into the deep end of projects of helping figure things out that we'd not done before, things like launching the Canva Foundation and just like pathways that had never been trodden before, but also building really great connections right across the business. So both from the leadership team on projects that we worked on, but also my favorite thing to do is something that I call cheese grating, which is taking an idea to a group of people and letting them cheese grate it. And so like, hey, we're going to launch the Canva Foundation to the team on Tuesday. This is what we're thinking. Like, would love to just like help us understand what's landing, what's not, what is resonating, what's not. And so really building fantastic connections through the business, especially in the engineering team, actually, because I found that they were the ones that were really willing to give very frank feedback, which was actually incredibly valuable and made all of our launches that much better. And so I spent those 18 months really learning the business. And then we had an opening in our people space. And so I'd put together this kind of pack of like what we could be hiring and put it to Mel and Cliff on like, here's what I think the role could look like in the next iteration of what it looks like. And then I got a call on a Sunday a few weeks later with Cliff saying, hey, we really want you to take on this job. Actually, we don't want you to hire it. We want you to take it on. I think I said, have you lost your mind? I think was actually the first phrase out of my mind, because it just was like, what are you talking about? I don't have any experience in this. There are many professionals who know what they're doing in this space. I don't come from a HR background. What on earth are you talking about? Which in retrospect probably wasn't the best thing to have said when your boss says, hey, we want to give you this promotion. But it was a really frank conversation of like, no, we think you can learn all of that. you've been on this hockey stick growth. What we really care about is someone who understands our philosophies and what we're trying to do being in this role. And you've seen behind the scenes for the last 18 months, 2 years, you know exactly what we're looking for and what we're after. We know you can figure this out. And so took on the role as an interim role and said, okay, I'm happy to take it on as an interim. We just see how it goes. And if it all falls apart, I come back to my role. They said, sure, that sounds fine. It's been interim for the last 5 years.
Well, I'm sure y'all made it official. No?
Eventually at some point it became official, but it really was this fantastic experience. But it probably was some of the hardest years of the hardest months of my life for sure. Jumping into a space that hadn't had a leader for a while. It was such an integral part of the Canva experience, but these teams were so disparate. And so really taking it on and kind of wrapping arms around okay, what have we been and what do we now need to be in a company that's growing this fast in a remote world now where it was middle of COVID? And then what skills do we have? What skills are being underleveraged and what skills don't we have that we need to be looking for and bringing in externally? And so it was a really fantastic growth moment, but certainly not an easy walk in the park, I would say.
Well, it's not an easy job, having done it myself is not easy. What did you find, most surprising or the thing that was most difficult when you kind of took this on? COVID aside, because,
Yeah, I think that was a completely different beast. I think the things that I learned the most were there were so many, honestly. I think some of the biggest learnings had to be just how much depth went into HR teams. I think I had always appreciated HR teams as they play an important function, but I hadn't understood the nuance or the depth or the care, honestly. It was a real moment of learning and unpicking of this whole network of deep care and deep craft exists underneath every organization. And when it's not running well, it has enormous ripple impacts on the business and how that is able to operate. And when it's running really well and it's running efficiently and that team feels very empowered and that team is in a good space, it has amazing effects on the business and what the business can achieve. And I just hadn't had the opportunity to peek behind the curtain into HR teams and what they were doing and what they were working on and how interconnected it all was from, how a potential candidate experiences the company and what their vision of the company is right through to recruitment and how that exists, what happens when people go through the hardest moments of their life at a company, what happens when people get raises or go for promotions and don't get it. All of those moments that make up an employee experience have had the fingerprints of some person in some HR team touching them. And if that works really well, it works really well. And if it doesn't, it really doesn't. And I just hadn't grasped the real depth of that experience, all the care that has to go into each of those moments.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And speaking of some of those moments, I know you were talking about parental leave and, parents coming back to work. It's something that I don't think many companies have figured out, really. Like how to re-onboard someone that's been, whether it's 3 months or 6 months, whatever time they've been gone. And a lot of companies kind of fail parents, I would say, in this aspect. How do you guys think about it? And what do you guys do that you think is maybe more unique to that experience than what other companies provide?
I think that we haven't figured it out either, I think is the honest truth. I think
that makes me feel better about myself because I didn't figure it out.
But I would hate for any listeners to think that Canva has everything figured out or anyone has anything figured out, right? Because things are so changing all the time. The learnings I would say we would have is in the early days, there was certainly a lot of playbooks of this is how to do it. I would say when I came on board and started to look at the playbooks, it was a lot of here's how best to think about this. Here's what you kind of need to do. Over time, that's really evolved to more of, hey, here's the things that may work. Here's some stories of what did work and didn't work from others, like sharing people's stories and experiences of I came back to work and it was the hardest 6 months of my life. My team had moved on without me. I didn't have any credibility in this team because nobody knew me. I found it really hard to balance. I felt guilty for having to leave for pickup when everyone else was working really hard into the evenings when there was a big project. Like I don't know how to handle this. And I didn't know who to tell that to because I didn't want to seem weak. Like sharing those stories is actually some of the most important parts of it, of like, hey, if we were to go through this again or support a coach, so a coach at Canva is your manager, like if we were to support those people in supporting that person, here's what it would look like. Here's the questions to be asking. Here's, some phrases that can really help settle someone's anxiety when they are coming back from their own stories rather than us as a HR team telling that. And on the same in the inverse, here's some stories that went incredibly well of someone that went out on parental leave doing one job, came back and actually had a different passion project. And so we put them onto a slightly different project or a slightly different goal. And that worked really well because it was time bound and they knew what success looked like and they could work it within their schedule. And they got kind of like a goal in the net that then helped build their confidence over time. And so something that we have learned is sharing those stories is some of the most impactful. And lots of that doesn't come from us as a team sharing those informal playbooks. It comes from, we've got a parents and carers channel on Slack, and some of those stories are organically being shared by parents for parents that people can experience for themselves. So it doesn't feel formal or led by the company. It feels very organic that people are sharing, hey, I'm coming back from leave and I'm really struggling with this aspect of my role. Like, does anyone have any guidance of what could help? And then making sure that our coaches or managers are really equipped to support through that. And they know the signs, they know how to manage that. But like I said, we haven't figured it all out. It's something that we're learning as we're going. Something that we do want to really start to lean into is more of the tailored communications through the process. So that's something we're building at the moment of, you've got a coachee coming back in 3 months' time. Here's what to start thinking about. Like, what projects have you got coming on the horizon that you could be giving them? Hey, you've got a coachee coming back in 2 weeks' time. You should be checking in. Here's some conversation starters that might be helpful if you've never done this before. That's the kind of where we're going and what we want to be starting to build.
That's cool. And I would imagine that with AI, some of that prompting is easier. So
I think that the prompting and the how to think about things, and especially I'm not a parent, so having something to bounce with. But I also think there's human connection has to be involved, right? Like, that's the part of AI can help build out hey, AI, build out a plan of when is the best touch points to be reaching out to parents over that time, but actually then collaborating with real humans who've been through the experience to make sure that it doesn't feel AI to the person experiencing it. Hey, here's the starting point. Now let's cheese grate that of what was your actual experience? And if you had received this prompt, how would it feel? And that kind of back and forth, which I actually think is the best way of working with AI, right? You start with something and then you iterate and you build on it with the humans in the loop. I think it really gets to something next level.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like, fundamentally, though, you have to back all this into Canva is a company with a culture that enables you to do all of these things, right? Which is, a lot of folks oh, how would we do this? Or how would we think about doing it? And they don't actually create an environment where that's possible, right? So even just having the platform that you're working from to be able to do these unique programs, which, probably shouldn't be unique, but sound unique, right? Because it's nobody else does this. But yeah, just having a culture that supports that, I think, is absolutely critical.
Yeah. One thing we were talking about before we got started was this aspect of performance, right? And you're scaling so fast. And I know what that challenge is like, is how do you scale quickly and keep the performance high? So how have you all thought about that at Canva?
I think it's something that's an ongoing evolution, I would say. I think something that in the very early days we tried to do kind of built into how we operate. We were very goal orientated, which I think is easy to say, but quite hard to achieve in reality. And so something we tried to do early on was really building into our foundations of how we operate. Things like, for example, we had season openers. So at a season opener, it would be this big event where, bear in mind, we're mostly based in Australia then, so it's much easier when you're on one hemisphere because you can do things like Winter Wonderland as the theme when it's winter for everybody in the southern hemisphere. When you go global, it's a bit harder because someone's celebrating summer, someone's celebrating winter. But it was these kind of big themed events of Winter Wonderland, and it would be this amazing event where you'd look back at the season just gone of what had been achieved and what the goals were and what the impact of those goals were. So we launched the Canva Docs product, and this has been our early insight into the data. This is what's happened, and it would be a big celebration of that. And then you'd also be accountable for saying, in the next season, this is what we're going to work on, and here's what we're going to achieve. And it kind of created this cadence right throughout the year of this kind of public accountability, but also in this fun, quirky way that got people really engaged, that also meant people knew what was happening right across the company. Great visibility of what people were working on, what people were launching on, what we cared about, what our data was saying, all of those things in one, and making sure that it was mapped in. That kind of evolved. We still do season openers today, but it kind of evolved into more of, it's really hard to do that when you're a company of 5,000. It's much easier to do when you're a company of 500.
Yeah.
those kind of things need to change and evolve. And so then over time, we brought in our growth and impact process, which is our take on a performance cycle, and then had it be the growth and impact process was more about setting personal goals of what you were going to achieve and how they laddered up to the bigger goals of the company, and make sure that was on more of a cyclical version as well. So it was less about, at the 500 mark, telling the company, and more working with a coach on what is the most impactful thing that you could be doing and working over that over time. But making sure that those systems all connect together. So there is that company visibility about what's important and what we're working on, and then the individual accountability on what matters most and what's going to drive the needle on that, and helping that be the bedrock of what your performance culture is built on. It's achieving those goals, and then building a performance culture of giving great feedback on top of that, so it sits on something and feels like it's based in something that is moving the company forwards rather than feeling very personal.
Yeah, I mean, most companies just they don't do it very well, and and feedback is not it's not really part of the process a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
I tell this story. I was at an airport, and this is a couple of years ago, but it's like the end of the year, so it's like review time, and this guy was at the airport, and you could tell he was talking to his employee, and he's like, "Hey, so we just did the review, and I noticed that you rated yourself all 5s. Just so you know, like, getting a 5 is really hard. Okay, hardly anyone in the company gets a 5. Okay, so I just want you to know that. I gave you a 4.65 on this and a 4.65 on that, which is really good. And so you're doing great, and I can't wait to kill it next year. All right, have a good holiday." And that was talk about experience for an employee. But that was the review. And I would bet to say that is probably most employees' experiences with reviews, right? And did that employee get any feedback other than he shouldn't rank himself a 5? Because it's really hard.
And even then, I don't think, yeah.
But I mean, I don't think companies make, they do a review to figure out what they should pay somebody, right? Like, let's figure out what their raise is going to be, where they're going to fit on the bell curve. That's why they do these performance reviews. They don't do it to help the employee necessarily. So I'm glad that feedback is part of your process, because that's how you actually get employees better, is through feedback and coaching.
I couldn't agree more.
I was going to say, I actually really like that you call your managers coaches instead of managers.
I think language really matters, right? Language is so important. So coaches being managers, performance cycle being growth and impact. Like, we want to focus on your growth and what your impact has been. It's not, performance is kind of it's too punitive, and it's such a outdated word that just doesn't encapsulate what you actually care about and what you're trying to drive. So for example, in that experience, I think something that has become quite evident is that a lot of companies go through performance cycles as just a tick box exercise, as like, oh, we should be doing performance reviews. And then they put, however many people away from actually delivering on what their goal should be to do this tick box exercise that then doesn't move the company forwards. And something that we've really tried to do in all of our communications has been to say, when we do the growth and impact cycle really well, it leapfrogs the company forwards, because everyone knows better what they're doing that's great, that they should continue doing. They feel really proud of what they've achieved. They know what great success looks like, and they're very aware of what they need to focus on to have better impact in the months to come. That's when it's done really well. When it's done really poorly, someone comes out feeling their work that they worked really hard on behind the scenes was unseen and unfelt and undervalued. They come out feeling like their coach doesn't understand them. They come out feeling very unclear on what they can be doing moving forwards to have a better impact. Like, here's what great success and great failure look like. Make sure that you're tailoring your experiences accordingly and focusing on these things that we want to be focusing on, because when we get this right, it has a monumental impact. I walked in our conversation the other day in the people team where I walked into a meeting room and 2 people were coming out, and one of them was visibly upset but laughing a lot, and I just said, like, what have I walked into here? And they had this really gorgeous, honest feedback conversation of just like, hey, I really loved it when you helped me do this thing that was really hard and I'd not done before, but also when you're doing it next time, can you not like jump in and like come and save me? I don't need that. I need you to support me behind the scenes. This is what it would have looked like that was really good. And then they'd had this really gorgeous moment where they'd had a really honest conversation about what great looked like. And that was because they knew the growth and impact conversation was coming, and they'd preemptively had a great conversation. And that had both solidified their connection to each other of like, I'm supporting you and I'm in your corner, but also I want to help you grow and I'm going to be honest with you about what that looks like as a peer. That's when great success happens. That's when it becomes that kind of combination deal of a great operations and a great human experience that then propels the whole company forwards in a really meaningful way, but also is great for the individual, right? They learn more about themselves, which everyone kind of wants to do. It can be a really great thing if done well.
No, absolutely. Pete, were you going to say something?
No,
I
just
thought
agreeing.
you're just agreeing. Yeah, I'm agreeing too. I mean, Pete, you help so many different portfolio companies, and a lot of times they're hiring their first chief people officer. I mean, obviously, if you could get them a Jennie, I mean, you need to tell them how to find more Jennies. But I mean, I don't see companies really think critically sometimes about. It's like, oh gosh, we needed to be doing a performance review, so like, let's put one in place. Not really like, what's the problem we're trying to solve, and what's the experience, and like, let's make this something that propels the company. Like, do you see companies doing that these days? I mean, maybe it's changing. I don't know.
I would say, I mean, in the Excel portfolio, everyone does everything perfectly well. Outside of that, no. Yeah. It's interesting, right? Because for sure, I think there's just a lack of high expectations, maybe, or even just strategic thinking applied to the people function in general, by most companies, because it becomes a bit more of a process and just I don't know how to describe it. I mean, just this entity that's sort of like, well, this is a necessary evil, right? But not really thinking about as much as people love to say they are, it doesn't quite come out in, how they operate. And actually, I think when you were asking me, I did have a question running through my head, which gets to some of what you said, is when people would say that, okay, well, how do I find a Jennie, right, for us? And, I love that response. Usually they'll pick some high profile person and be like, I need to hire my Sheryl Sandberg. And you're like, okay, well, that's what this looked like, right? Because then you would say, well, how do I find a Jennie? And it's like, well, look at Jennie's background when she got hired at Canva. It's like, do you want to go that route? Like, that just took some risk on obviously the part of the founders, some creativity, some ability to see where this could possibly go, and they acted on it, right? Where generally most of what I get are, well, I want to hire that person now, right? I don't want to actually take the risk or, attempt to try to find that person in a more creative way. And actually, Jen, I was going to ask you that, like, has your experience, in terms of your journey at Canva translated into how you guys think about hiring people at Canva? Is the ability for the hiring manager to actually get a little creative or to think more opportunistically? Because, inevitably you bump up against also there's not enough qualified people out there, right? And, the sort of death spiral of it's like, we need to hire this person. Oh, I'm not meeting anybody I like, and blame the recruiting team, and on we go, right? But sorry, I'm rambling and making comments and statements rather than questions. But back to that, like,
Pete likes to do that.
yes,
I love it. No, because I think there's so much in there that's so important, right? I think the first thing is, like, I was at companies before I was at Canva, and I had all the ideas of things that I wanted to achieve at those companies, but I wasn't in the environment where I was able to do them. Whereas at Canva, it was very different. I had fantastic founders who, one of my very first days, I was in front of the entire, like, extended leadership team, which at the time was about 50. And there was a question in a Q&A that Melon Cliff turned to me and said, Jennie, what do you think? Like, you have to support people. And like, they knew that I could answer it. It wasn't just like putting me on the spot for no valid reason. But like, we had a lot of conversations on this topic that the person had asked a question about. And so they gave me a platform to speak, which gave me confidence in building my own confidence in my own abilities that I hadn't necessarily had at other companies. And then through time of, how are we going to make sure that employees feel like this? Like, Jennie, what do you think? Can you go away and like build us a prototype of what that could look like and come back? Like, okay, absolutely. And that kind of builds confidence over time. I talk about my time at Canva as like really getting back on the horse in that confidence way of being built up. But also, so you have to share a lot of context with people, and then you have to really put them into situations or put them on projects that they can achieve things with, and then you have to support them through that, right? That's the important bit that Mel and Cliff were fantastic at going back and forth with me on projects so that it got to a really gorgeous outcome and a really great outcome. And I think that helps in identifying great talent that you might have in your organization that you aren't really even thinking about yet, but actually might be ready for that step if they have the right environment, if they are supported right. I have found the same in the people organization at Canva. We have found phenomenal talent from within our own teams who have taken big steps up and now are achieving incredible things. But it took someone really backing them and really betting on them and encouraging them and supporting them through the lows that inevitably come with growth of like, this is really hard and I don't know how to achieve this and I'm not really sure how to handle this, and doing that. But also, so really looking at your own organization of who is in your company that actually could be taking that step up. And there are many, I'm telling you now, like there are many at Canva that are yet to be discovered. I'm sure of it. But also when you're looking externally, like, are you looking at differences? So Cliff kind of found me in a whole host of applicants that were phenomenal and really could have on paper done the job in a much better way than me, but he was sure of what he was looking for in that role. Similarly, we really try and ask our hiring managers to be creative, not to look at just kind of pedigree named companies of have done this before, but actually are hungry and coming up through, different organizations or actually just completely different backgrounds. So I was telling this story the other day, or someone was telling me this story the other day, which was one of our great AI researchers that we have now was when he was hired at Canva stocking shelves at a supermarket. But he was incredibly active on a Discord community in AI research. And so was just super interested in this in a really meaningful way and having incredible impact. And then the hiring manager just reached out to him on Discord and said, hey, have you ever thought about a career in this? What does that look like? Would you want a conversation? Like that's really amazing. Thinking outside of the box of like people that are really passionate, especially in an AI world, like how are people thinking differently about this? Because has had X amount of years experience doesn't necessarily translate to impact. And I think the harmony becomes when you plug people together who have got a lot of experience also with kind of up and coming talent and that harmonization. So we think about that a lot as a leadership level. So I came in as an EA and worked my way into the people role. Ak, who's our CMO, came in as a communications intern and is now the CMO. But at the same time, we have Kelly Stegelberg, who came from Zoom as their CFO and is now Canva CFO. And we have Simon Newton, who's our head of engineering, who came from Uber and Google. And kind of blending those backgrounds together can create really solid teams that both respects deep craft that comes from experience, but also respects kind of fresh new ideas or new ways of thinking. And the harmonization is actually some of the most magical kind of outcomes come from that.
No, yeah, I love that. And I think, probably one of the common attributes that all of you have that you were kind of getting to with the AI person is like that passion, right? And here's this person and stocking shelves, but they're incredibly passionate about this topic, and that stuff that you can't train, right? Like it's in you, right? And the other thing that I love, about just you kind of coming from a different industry, hospitality, it's that, the work ethic, right? I don't know, many people have, a lot of people I know have worked in restaurants, but if you haven't worked in a restaurant, it's really hard. Like it's a really hard job. And like the work ethic that you have to have in restaurants and hospitality and things like that is bar none. And if you're not making it in that industry, like it's just not for you. But it also says something about like the determination and the drive and the strive for excellence and making an experience amazing and you have to juggle so many things in those roles. So you have to be an excellent operator. But I think many times companies go after the pedigree or they go after the perfect list of things that, they have to be from the, this company, that company, or they have to have solved this for 10 years, right? It's like, well, no, they don't, and what I've learned in my experience is that yes, experience matters for sure. And sometimes it matters more in some roles than others. And you can't discount it, but the attributes of what makes someone successful in your organization, the DNA that scales, that is not trainable a lot of times.
I think it's also the curiosity, right? Like,
yes.
I think that you spoke about the passion of that person, but also it's just the curiosity of like, well, why doesn't this work? Or why has this been done this way? We were speaking about performance reviews, like, okay, coming in with a kind of it's an overused term, but kind of first principles lens on things of like, why are we doing this? What's the point? We're spending thousands of hours a year on this, which is taking away from our time building. Could we be doing something else with that time? Or is this genuinely moving the company forwards? And that kind of curiosity to ask the questions that are often unasked, but also the kind of humility to be able to say, I don't come from this background. And so this is all coming from a kind of place of seeking to understand. But why is it that we're doing this? Or why is it that we're not doing this when it might just be glaringly obvious to someone who doesn't come from that background? And if you can't articulate the why really clearly, it's time to kind of rethink that process, which comes from people with that kind of creative thinking or people who have never been in that space before. Like some of the greatest conversations that I have on our performance cycle or our comp cycle come from those conversations with engineers who are just like, I'm a recipient of this process and this is how it feels and this is where I think we can improve. I'm like, great, because you're not behind the scenes looking at this every day, you're fresh eyes, but also there's a great conversation there of like, there's all this context that you might have missed of why things happen the way they do, but also your fresh eyes can really help inform a better process. And that's that curiosity both ways that I think is such an underrated skill set that I think every company should needs to be leaning into.
Absolutely. Gotta love the engineers, man. They they always let you know, which I love
phenomenal.
Too. I love too.
Key again back to what a little bit what we were saying before too. It's like the top-down Canva is a culture that rewards that like creativity, to call it growth and impact, to think differently. I mean, a lot of folks talk about it, but then, you're sort of gets punitively judged by whatever decision you made if it didn't happen to fit, what people expected, right? So I think we were having that conversation on another podcast. That's too, right? Whereas we really don't reward creativity. Fail fast, but not too much. And, or, again, just don't take too much of a risk. So if you can create a culture though, where people are comfortable with that, I think you can get outsized returns.
Mm-hmm.
Which usually comes from leadership, right? Like I think that's something that Mel and Cliff have really tried to build into the culture at Canva from the very, very early days. Not only that culture comes from everyone, but also that great ideas come from everyone and that the status quo is there to be kind of looked at and understood, but not to be replicated. It's not there as a playbook. It's there as here's what might have worked for XYZ companies. That's not to say it will work at Canva. Let's think about this a bit differently of goals first of what are we trying to achieve and then build our own thing with kind of best practices or first principles in mind, but kind of that creativity that allows some really phenomenal ideas to shine through.
Yeah. Want to be cognizant of time because first of all, pod people, I was late because I was in a meeting that was running late. And so now Jennie's running late, which I feel incredibly bad about.
No, it's all good. I actually had till 9:15, so I have another 8 minutes if you've got.
Okay, well, good. Because we didn't get to a couple things because we were talking about this before the show started, so I want to make sure that we talk about it. But you've talked a lot about caring for employees during this conversation, and whether that's through, them coming back from leave. But you also talked about this aspect of like championing things around domestic violence. And I don't know many companies, if any, that talk about domestic violence, like, because it's maybe uncomfortable and people don't want to assume. But tell me more about that. I'd love to hear and learn about, just how you think about that at Canva.
Yeah, so this came actually through one of our Fix-It forms. So in a Fix-It form, someone had said, so we have 3 big programs that run at Canva at the moment that we're building a few more, but one is grief and loss, one is family domestic violence, and one is cancer support or long illness support. The Fix-It form came in from someone who had lost their wife and were struggling to kind of reacclimatize back to work after that experience and said, hey, I had an okay experience at Canva through this, but I think we can do a lot better at this. And I don't think we are talking about this enough. And it was this gorgeous Fix-It form that was so helpful of like, here's my experience and here's where I think we've got a gap that we could improve on. And so we worked together with the people team and that individual to create the grief and loss guide, which was both for someone who might be experiencing grief and loss, but also as a coach who might be supporting someone through grief and loss. Because if you've not supported someone through that moment, you often don't know how to handle it. And this was pre-ChatGPT. So like, there's no like, hey, what do I do to handle this? It was either leverage your community around you or kind of blunder your way through it and hope for the best and just rely on gut instinct. And so we created this playbook on with that person, but also with anyone else who had gone through grief or loss that was able to then input into the playbook of, people said to me, oh, if you need anything, just reach out. And then everyone who had experienced it said, that's actually one of the worst things you can say because it puts another thing on my plate to be starting to do. And so there was a lot of that kind of like, this might sound helpful, but actually how it's interpreted is this. What instead could be really helpful is this. And so it started with that. We created this playbook of it can be leveraged anytime by anyone in and out of Canva. And then we open sourced it. So you can find it on the internet. You can find this anywhere.
Love
Because
that.
what we also thought was, I came from a much smaller organization before Canva, and there was no way that I had the skills or the people in my team or the time to be able to build something like that. What I needed was the resource. And so we have incredibly thoughtful people at Canva that put this great thing together. And when other companies were reaching out to say, hey, what do you do in this instance? It kind of felt nonsensical to hold that behind kind of closed doors. And so we've open sourced it. It's able to be found. Similarly, we then did the same with family domestic violence. I think when you look at the statistics on family domestic violence, every single person will know someone who's going through this, whether you know it or not. I think it's just a horrible fact that we have to navigate. And that is such an unknown fact too. And so when I started talking about family domestic violence and supporting people through that experience, we did the same. We created a similar playbook with the team who had gone through this, who were comfortable to work with us on it. There were so many conversations of, oh, but that wouldn't happen we don't have anyone at Canva going through that, right? Well, of course we do. We're a 5,500 person organization. Like, of course you do. But also there's a learning aspect of this happens to just about everyone, every level, every gender, every role, every location. There is nowhere that is kind of exempt from this, and actually shining a light on that to say, could be happening anywhere. Here's what to look out for. Here's how to start to have those conversations if you think something is off, or here's how to create a space where people might feel comfortable to raise this with you. And then here's how to support through it. Don't be pushing on people. Don't be doing this. Instead, here's what you can do to provide that safe experience. And here's what to do. Here's what Canva provides. Here's the leave we provide. Here's the subsidies we provide. Here's what you can do to help. And actually just making that an easier thing to navigate when you are going through it, but you don't know who to tell and you don't know how to keep it confidential, but also who to go to. And those kind of hard moments. So not shying away from those hard moments as an organization, actually shining more of a light on those moments to say, this happens, whether we like it or not. This is how to navigate it the best we possibly can to support our people. And here's what it means for the work and how to be kind and considerate of what that might mean, while also supporting the team around this person and keeping things confidential, et cetera, et cetera. I think those moments are really hard moments, but they are some that exhibit your culture more than anything else and will stay with people for their whole lives, right? Like way past the doors of your organization.
Totally. I mean, it's and it's interesting because I didn't shy away from those things either, but I think maybe a lot of people in our position do because they're worried about the risk that it may cause, or don't want to get into like a legal situation or whatever it might be. But
or you just don't know how to talk about it, right? You don't even know how to start to respectfully talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. But life happens. And it's happening to all of us all the time. And if you can figure out how to allow your employees to be successful at every point of their life, right?
Yeah.
And go, understanding that there's going to be ups and downs with those things. But if you make your organization this amazing place to be at and to be from, like you said, those experiences are things that they will never forget, and they'll hold in them in their hearts forever. And guess what? They'll tell the rest of the world about it. And that's not a bad thing, right?
Exactly right. I also think there's a risk. There's a risk in doing everything, right? There's also a risk in not talking about it, which we experienced with the support guides that we're putting together for kind of chronic illness or cancer diagnoses or people going through experiences like a stroke, for example. The reason that one came about was because I got a message on Slack from an employee who said, I really think we can do better in supporting people who are going through cancer diagnoses. Here's my experience. Here's kind of what I'm dealing with. I'm running out of leave. Here's all these things. And I looked through their case and I thought, this is awful, because what they haven't been able to get in touch with is the fact that we have a lot more support that they could have tapped into that they didn't know about.
Right.
And so there was a kind of moment of not talking about it actually was the risk, because this person was going through a really isolating experience that they were finding really hard, and they didn't know the support that was available to them. And by us not talking about it, that was, in my mind, a much greater risk of this person navigating this alone that actually far outweighed any risk that might come from talking about it.
Yeah, so true. Well, I'm so glad you got to come on the show. I have
Me
one more
too.
favor. I have one more favor for you. We always ask our guests to leave our listeners with something inspiring. You've left us with many inspiring things, but what's the one thing you want people thinking about as they go through their week?
Oh, goodness, something inspiring is quite a tall order.
I know. Sorry.
No, it's a wonderful question. I think for me, it's that I think that it really doubles down on the conversation that we were having earlier. If you are an organization, where are you looking for your talent? Are you looking for it internally? Are you looking for the hidden gems that might be in your organization that just need a kind of step up or need the next project or need to know that someone believes that they can achieve something? And then on the flip side, if you are someone looking for your next role or your next thing to really sink your teeth into, how are you thinking about it a bit differently? What are you passionate about? What are you curious about? Not necessarily thinking about careers just as linear or next step up or next thing, but actually what would drive you to be the most passionate version of yourself or the most curious version of yourself that could allow you to do some incredible work that might not be the kind of logical next step on paper, but actually might really align with what you want to achieve at a company that you really want to achieve it with, and thinking just a little bit differently about talent, both in how organizations view it, but also how we as individuals view it and our next step or our next kind of impact that we want to have.
Yeah, do what Jennie did, y'all. Like, go after it.
Build a website.
Build the website. Get noticed.
Also,
And
find the thing that you're really passionate about, right? I couldn't have done that unless I was really passionate about it. I think find that passion and then harness everything you've got into it.
I love it. Jennie, I'm so glad you got to come on the show. Thank you so much. I know our listeners are going to love this episode. So thank you.
Thank you. It was a great conversation. I really appreciate you both.
Yay.
Thank you.
All right. We have to upload.